January 20th, 1981. Ronald Reagan places his hand on the Bible and takes the oath of office. At that moment, a 20-volume, 3,000-page document is already circulating through his transition team. It's called Mandate for Leadership. It contains 2,000 specific policy recommendations, and by the end of Reagan's first year in office, 60% of them will be implemented. The Heritage Foundation didn't just help elect a president, they handed him the instruction manual. Welcome back to Ethos Trek. I'm Sarah, and this is episode 2 of our Heritage Foundation series. Personnel is policy. The mandate. What Reagan received. Within days of Reagan's election victory in November 1980, the Heritage Foundation delivered something unprecedented. A comprehensive blueprint for a conservative government. This wasn't just broad principles. This was granular. Specific regulations to repeal. Specific programs to cut. Specific people to fire. Specific legal interpretations to adopt. The recommendations included cutting the food stamp program, abolishing the Department of Energy, withdrawing the Justice Department from civil rights cases involving school desegregation, and ending affirmative action programs. Reagan loved it. He gave a copy to every member of his cabinet at their first meeting. And then he started checking items off the list. The implementation. By the end of Reagan's first year, Heritage estimated that 60% of their recommendations had been implemented or initiated. Let that sink in. A private organization funded by beer magnates and oil heirs wrote the operating manual for the United States government. And most of it was implemented within 12 months. This wasn't influence. This was governance by proxy. And it wasn't subtle. Even the Soviet Union noticed. After Reagan met with Mikhail Gorbachev in Moscow, the Wall Street Journal reported that Gorbachev complained Reagan was influenced by the Heritage Foundation. The Soviet leader recognized what many Americans still don't, that a think tank was driving American foreign and domestic policy. The war on public education. The 44-year campaign. Here's something most Americans don't know. The Heritage Foundation has been trying to eliminate the Department of Education since 1981. Their first mandate for leadership called for the closing of the Department of Education, which had only been created in 1979, and, quote, reducing its controls over American education, unquote. They also called for repealing the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965, which provides federal funding to help disadvantaged students. Reagan tried. In 1983, he pushed to abolish the Department of Education. He failed. Congress wouldn't go along. But here's the thing about Heritage. They play the long game. In his campaign, Reagan had called for, quote, the total elimination of the U.S. Department of Education, severe curtailment of bilingual education, and massive cutbacks in the federal role in education, unquote. And while he couldn't eliminate the department, he could starve it. Over his 8 years in office, Reagan cut the federal education budget by half. When he was elected, the federal share of education spending was 12%. When he left, it was 6%. His Secretary of Education, William Bennett, toured the country attacking public education, calling teachers, quote, cowards, unquote, dismissing the, quote, multi-layered self-perpetuating bureaucracy of administrators, unquote, and insisting that schools wouldn't be improved by, quote, throwing money at them, unquote. Meanwhile, Reagan redirected federal education funds away from local school districts and toward state governments. He provided federal money to beef up education staffing at the state level, staffing that would be more susceptible to conservative pressure than thousands of independent local districts. The long game. Fast forward 44 years. Project 2025, the Heritage Foundation's current blueprint, opens its education chapter with this sentence, quote, federal education policy should be limited and ultimately the Federal Department of Education should be eliminated, unquote. Same goal, same organization, 4 decades of persistence. And this time, they might succeed. In March 2025, President Trump signed an executive order directing the Education Secretary to, quote, take all necessary steps to facilitate the closure of the Department of Education. Congress still needs to approve actual elimination, but the administration has already canceled nearly $900 million in contracts at the Institute of Education Sciences, the independent research arm of the department. 44 years. That's how long Heritage has been working on this single goal. And that persistence, that willingness to keep pushing the same agenda across decades, across administrations, is what makes them so effective and so dangerous. The personnel pipeline, the revolving door. Quote, personnel is policy, unquote. That phrase originated with Heritage Foundation leaders, and it encapsulates their strategy. It's not enough to write the playbook. You need your people in place to execute it. In 1988, within days of George H.W. Bush's election victory, Heritage sent the president-elect's personnel director 2,500 resumes and 7,500 additional names of potential appointees. They had built a database, a farm system for conservative government. The practice continued and accelerated. By 2014, Heritage had built a database of approximately 3,000 conservatives they trusted to serve in a future Republican administration. When Trump won in 2016, Heritage was ready. At least 66 Heritage Foundation employees and alumni were hired into Trump's first term. CNN reported that, quote, no other Washington institution has that kind of footprint in the transition, unquote. And now, in Trump's second term, the numbers are even more striking. According to analysis by Dismog, more than 50 high-level Trump administration officials have links to Heritage and its allied organizations. 70% of his cabinet has ties to Project 2025 groups. This is what institutional capture looks like. The constitutional problem. Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution gives the President power to appoint officers of the United States, quote, by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, unquote. The founders envisioned a system where the President would choose qualified individuals, the Senate would scrutinize them, and the result would be a government of competent public servants accountable to the people. What Heritage has built is something different, a shadow government in waiting, ideologically vetted not by the Senate, but by a private organization funded by anonymous donors. When you apply to Heritage's presidential personnel database, you're asked whether you agree with statements like, quote, "The president should be able to advance his or her agenda through the bureaucracy without hindrance from unelected federal officials," unquote. That's not a job qualification. That's a loyalty test. And it represents a fundamental shift in how our government is staffed. From merit and expertise to ideological alignment with a private organization's agenda. How about some questions for reflection? Think about this with me. First, if a private organization can write 2,000 policy recommendations and see 60% implemented within a year, who is actually governing? The elected president or the unelected think tank? Second, what does it mean for democratic accountability when the people staffing your government were vetted not by public processes, but by a private foundation with undisclosed donors? Third, Heritage has been trying to eliminate the Department of Education for 44 years. What other long-term projects might be underway that we haven't noticed because we're focused on the daily news cycles? Concrete action items for this episode? 1. Look up your members of Congress on ProPublica's, quote, Trumptown, unquote, database. See which ones have connections to Heritage Foundation or its allied organizations. 2. Check how your representatives voted on education funding. The Department of Education website has records of federal education spending by state and district. 3. Research who testified at your senator's confirmation hearings for cabinet positions. Were Heritage personnel involved? 4. Contact your representatives about the Department of Education. 63% of Americans oppose its elimination. Make sure your voice is counted. 5. Follow @OpenSecrets and @ProPublica for ongoing tracking of the revolving door between think tanks and government. Coming next, in Episode 3, we'll examine what Heritage has been building for the past decade. Project 2025, and the most ambitious attempt yet to staff the entire executive branch with ideologically vetted personnel. We'll look at the database of 20,000 potential appointees, the training programs, the 180-day playbook. Because what happened under Reagan was the proof of concept. What's happening now is the full implementation. Thank you for listening. I'm Sarah, and this is Ethos Trek. I'll be back in a few days with Episode 3.